Last time I said we focused, of course, on the war in Israel, and we're glad that we can kind of hold our breath and trust the Lord for something to change. If it does not, well, it'll move toward change anyway, because the plan is to finish the job and to secure the country, and many of us are hoping to extend Israeli sovereignty in areas that has not been extended so that peace can prevail. But another contribution from the land of Israel is archaeology. This is the place where God showed up. All the prophets, all of the messages we have from the Scripture emanated from a real historical place. So I want to look at some of that. I want to start this morning with these insights in biblical archaeology, looking at one that's a little more difficult for us, and that is, where did Noah's Ark land? A lot of people have their ideas. There are many different places that have been discussed. As you know, Noah's Ark has not been officially found by anyone, despite rumors that often are on the social media or out on the web. So the question is, if you're going to find Noah's Ark, if you're going to deal with this subject that's so important from Scripture, because it deals with the gospel, it deals with the judgment that happened on the entire world, and then the one way of salvation that is in the ark itself, that one door that God himself opened and closed. And that's why this whole subject is important. It's not just something that deals with some lost relic, something. No, it deals with the message communicating to our generation that as it was in the days of Noah, so it'll be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. What was happening then is happening now, and we need the return of the Lord as much as we ever have. Now, when we look at this whole subject, the issue is to find out where this happened, because you can go to many different mountains and climb and spend literally millions of dollars trying to find something, but if you don't know where to look in the first place, you have a problem. You've wasted time. Genesis tells us that there was a mountain, and the mountain had to have been part of the subterranean or submerged land, because the Bible tells us in Genesis 7:19 that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. That means everything. And so one of the mountains that formed during the flood was one that emerged, and I'm going to argue about this one because this is the mountain we want to look at, both from the sense of history and also from the ancient Near East, the things that will give us some clues as to where the place is. This is Mount Ararat, and many people who are geologists who have never been to Mount Ararat and never done actual geology there to take samples of the rocks, which would have to be sedimentary if they've been into the water, will say this is what's called a stratovolcano. It's simply something that formed after the flood, therefore it's no longer a candidate for the landing place of the ark. But if you just look at this diagram quickly, you can see that forming under the water, you have all kinds of sedimentary rock in the core, and then you have this upthrust, which was the mountain that happened, and the ark would have landed at the top. So geologists who have spent time on the mountain give this kind of information that you do have this. Sure, it's a volcanic mountain. Many mountains formed afterward are volcanic, but the core is sedimentary, which means it could certainly have been there. When you come to Mount Ararat up on the top, this is 12,000 foot in this picture. There's these types of rocks that look like pillows, but they were formed under the water, and they're called pillow lava. And it means at that height, you already had evidence that this was submerged, okay? And then if you come to traditional Mount Ararat, which is going to be our subject, looking at the beginning here, from about 8,000 feet below Mount Ararat, we're standing here, and up the mountain you have these different types of marine fossils. There are fossils on many high mountains around the world because this was once all submerged. So we have evidence of that. But it tells us in Genesis 8:4 that in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. Now we have a clue from the Scriptures if we know how to read it correctly, because it says the mountains of Ararat. So people are saying, well, where is this mountain or mountains of Ararat? Because that's where the ark must have landed. And frankly, a vessel the size the Bible describes of the ark, made of wood covered inside and outside with pitch, kind of like the creosote they put on the telephone poles. It's not something that is going to decay. It's not something that is going to be easily rotting and somehow falling away, nor would it have been used by people to build houses, because there's only 8 people at this point getting off the ark. About half of them are ladies. It took them 75 years at least to build the thing. To deconstruct it is not in their agenda. They're following the animals who are going on down the mountain where there's food for them and their food for now Noah and his family. So they're going to be going that direction and living in caves or eventually tents. So the ark would have just been left behind. Now, of course, you have conditions geologically that could happen. You could have earthquakes. You could have other things that could break the ark apart and deposit it in different places, and many believe that's what happened. What I want to look at is where is this mountains of Ararat or Mount Ararat? So we know from the ancient Near East there are a lot of discoveries that have been made, particularly from the late 19th century and into the 20th century, when places like Iraq and Iran were available for archaeologists. Because of the war conditions, because of militancy, these things have just been off limits. People have not been able to recover these things. So these things reside in museums today from earlier excavations. And looking at these cuneiform tablets, which are simply records from the past, from administrative archives of palaces, like of Sennacherib or in Babylon, they give us this information. And what's interesting is that they have the same type of stories we find in the Bible. Okay, whether it's the creation stories or the fall or the flood, all of these things are recorded from their perspective, from their pagan perspective, but there had to be an original historical core for this. Information had been laid through time. For instance, Josephus, who is a first century historian, said the flood and the ark are mentioned by all who have written histories of the barbarians. He means all the non-Greeks. Among them is Berosus the Chaldean, Hieronymus the Egyptian, author of the ancient history of Phoenicia, by Manassas and many others. And he goes, this is probably the same one who Moses, the Jewish legislator, wrote about. So from 2,000 years ago, we have someone speaking from 2,000 years before them of records being kept. You look into the seals. These are particularly, these are on little cylinders. They carve an image in here that tells a story. When you roll it out on clay, then you get the bigger picture. And a lot of these are simply used as personal seals or royal seals. This one shows a man named Utnapishtim from the Gilgamesh story. Gilgamesh, I'll show you in a moment, but Gilgamesh was an ancient king, a historical king, who was looking for a way to gain immortality. He had heard about a man named Utnapishtim, who is actually the biblical Noah from the correspondence. And he wanted to see if this guy, from their view, the gods had imbued immortality upon Utnapishtim because of his coming through the great flood. So he wanted to try to find this guy to see if he had the secret of immortality, might be able to give it to him. But on these seals, you'll see someone steering a boat. That's the idea. Here's one a little different that has the animals on the ark as well. But again, these are their crude understanding of it. Here's a different one that has actually one of the gods steering the boat for the figure. And here it shows them basically on a reed boat going around the Gulf during what we call the Bronze Age. So they were trying to get this black stone called bitumen they used to coat these boats with to keep them watertight. Now what was interesting is that this was found in the British Museum. This is Irving Finkel. He is the keeper of antiquities in the British Museum. It kind of looks like what you'd expect, that guy to look like. And so one of these clay tablets that was found is called the Babylonian World Map. It's the oldest map we know of anything recorded. And on it, it has the city of Babylon, it has Assyria, but it also has Urartu, which is the term from which the Urartians borrowed that name from the word Ararat. So these are the people who lived around Mount Ararat. And so he said, this has some very specific details at the edge of this map that shows the edge of that world where things were. So I'll show you what he said here. He said, this is a reference, and by the way, there's another little tablet I'm not showing you, but a man donated it to the museum, and he read it, and on it, it has also an account of the flood and the ark, and it mentions the animals coming 2 by 2. It's the only one that actually does that, as the Bible does. So he said, reading this map in light of this Simmons Ark tablet, the one I just mentioned, there's an alignment. He says it gives a geographical location. The oldest map in the world tells us now where the ark landed after the flood. After 130 years, since this crumbling, almost famous, much discussed lump of clay, it divulges an item of information that has been sought after for millennia and still is. He believes the location on the Babylon world map indicates travel straight through Urartu to a mountain that lay in the north at the very end of the Mesopotamian world. He identifies this mountain as modern Mount Ararat. Ironically, he says, whatever phenomena adventurers may claim to have found, it is Mount Ararat today that is the closest in location and spirit to the original conception of the Babylonian poets. So here is the historical King Gilgamesh. Here is the Gilgamesh epic. And again, it mentions not only this account of the flood, but it mentions the mountain that they landed on was called Mashu. And Mashu is a dual term that means twin. So you're looking at a mountain that is like a twin, is the idea. When we come to modern Mount Ararat, you can see that it's a twin mountain. There's not 2 peaks on the mountain. There's actually 2 mountains on one large plateau with nothing else around it. So when you talk about the mountains of Ararat, here's the question, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but people have tried to say, well, the mountains of Ararat refer simply to the boundaries of this ancient Urartu, and it could be anywhere, north, south, east, west, for quite some distance. We're going to say there's others who say, no, if you read it correctly, it's the mountains of Ararat. And so Ararat specifically has 2 mountains. And so rather than being a non-specific reference, it's a very specific reference. And that even more identifies it. And maybe the biblical text meant us to see that. So when you look at this, it's a good candidate because it tells us that when the ark landed, it was 75 days for the water that receded. In other words, water covered the earth. It was still covering the earth. Noah went out, still water there, saw no other tops of mountains. And then in 75 days, he began to see the top of the next mountain. And then from there, he could see more. If you did this calculation, it takes about 75 days to calculate for water to have descended from Greater Ararat, which is the highest mountain, to Lesser Ararat. And what's interesting is from Greater Mount Ararat, they've calculated you can see a distance of 120 miles, and you can see other mountains. But this stands alone in this plateau by itself. So we have Greater Ararat. Here's what Lesser Ararat looks like from Greater Ararat. So I want to look at some different types of evidence here. First, evidence of the landing place from ancient Near Eastern seals. What I'm telling you won't find this in many books. I don't know if you'll find it in any books at this point. I just finished the revision of my old book called The Stones Cry Out. It'll be out next August, and this time in full color with a lot of stuff. So I'm pulling some of this from what I've just been interested and passionate about. But here we have these seals, and they give us a lot of information, a lot of history. And on these seals, they always depict this sacred cosmic mountain. So their belief was, and probably from the very fact that here was a mountain where God deposited humanity from the very beginning. And so they look at this, and from their pagan conception as a cosmic mountain where the gods came down, this type of thing. And you'll see this on these different accounts. And that fits with many of these and you'll see it's a dual mountain. Look here, this is a cylinder seal it's an Akkadian cylinder seal from 2334 BC. It goes back, that's the 3rd millennium BC. Depicts the sun god Shamash, okay, with shoulder flames. He's rising between the two great mountains. Okay, he's been in the underworld. This is, again, their pagan conception. The sun comes out each day. Where did it go? Well, it goes back down to the underworld, and it comes back up each day. And these two great mountains depict the cosmic mountains between which he would ascend to hold the gates of heaven open. That's the idea after his nightly journey. Here is one. You can see the cylinder seal now on this side and what it looks like what's enrolled. And here you have Shamash again rising from Mount Mashu. So Mount Mashu is this twin mountain. You look at his feet, you'll see two mountain peaks, okay? They're not really peaks of the same mountain. They're two separate mountains. And he basically is coming up, as we said, at the end of the night to bring about the day. But he's with other gods who have water and fish, and this is all other stories. Here's another depiction of it. Again, you see the two mountains that are there. In this case is Marduk. This is a Babylonian account, and he is coming from the underworld. Here is a Persian shell cylinder seal with the god rising above Ararat. And this apparently is identified as Ararat in the literature. So it doesn't look like a single mountain, but it says it's Mount Ararat. And this is from the Mesopotamia. Here another one with the two twin mountains. So the idea here is when we talk about Mount Ararat, we're talking about mountains of Ararat, meaning a mountain that has a dual form, has two things. And only Mount Ararat uniquely has those features. So let me put on your thinking cap for a moment. I'm going to talk about the biblical text, the Hebrew text, because we have the term mountains of Ararat. Now, first, just the term Ararat. What in the world does Ararat mean? Okay, because it's not defined. It's in the Akkadian, these old ancient Near Eastern texts. It's referred to as the land of the Urartians, but Urartians get its name from Ararat, so it doesn't tell us a whole lot. But here's the question. The question is, where did the Urartians live? Well, if they lived over a large geographic area, then you're inclined to translate the idea mountains of Ararat, I mean the mountains where the Urartians lived, is this whole area. But we know now from a lot of sources that the Urartians were the direct ancestors of the Armenian people. They're the earliest known civilization in the region. They're the ones that border Mount Ararat, called Arida or Masas. These are two other terms used for it. So Arida, or Agrida, some would say, is a Turkish word that means great mountain. Masas is an Armenian word that means mother of mountains. The Persian term is Kui Noach, means mountains of Noah. So we have all these terms relating just to this mountain. So in Genesis 8:4, we have this term Ararat modified by mountains. It's Hare Ararat. And that creates a form that people have said, this is the region dominated by the Urartians. It's a wide geographical region. It can include both Mount Ararat in the north, another mountain in the south called Mount Judy. So these have been the two major candidates with some others scattered around. However, we have what's called the stele of Shalmaneser III. He was an Assyrian. He also came against Jerusalem at one point. I mean, he is a conqueror, and he conquered the Urartians. But when he refers to it, and I didn't show you a picture of the stele, there's actually two big monoliths that were found called the Cook monoliths, and they were found particularly at this one site where the victory stele was set up. And it's in Urartu because he says he conquered Urartu, and he put it right at the edge of the boundary. But the boundary stone puts it to, we have Lake, if you look, I don't have a map. If you had a map, you could see there's Lake Van, which is kind of in the center of this whole area, and then to the north of it is Mount Ararat. To the south of it is Mount Judy. What happens here is that because he seems to restrict the area of Urartu to this area north of Lake Van, it means the only candidate that remains for Mount Ararat is Mount Ararat and Mount Judy in the south. So if you argue from the idea of mountains of Ararat meaning the boundaries of Urartu, then you're still restricted to only Mount Ararat. But I argue more, my whole training is in Hebrew, and I want to look at the Hebrew text and argue from it. So when we look at this term, mountains of Ararat, the most literal ideas say there's a place called Ararat that has mountains. Okay? So it's not a region, but an actual mountain. And so the literal understanding here is the idea of not a non-specific mountain range, but a very specific mountain that has this idea of a plurality. Some of the famous grammarians, Kyle and Delitzsch, if some of you, they've been around almost 200 years now with their commentaries on the Old Testament. And they said, this is a specific reference to the two peaks of today's Arida, or masses referred to as Greater Ararat and Lesser Ararat. If this is the case, then Moses was describing the specific place where the landing of the ark took place, unique to the twin mountains of Mount Ararat, rather than just simply say, we don't know where it is. Moses couldn't tell us. Moses could tell it because God revealed it to him. So I think he's given us that specific reference. I'll give you more than that, okay? We have, from the 1st century BC, a Jewish paraphrase of the Bible. And Jesus even refers to it in some of his things. You know, when Jesus cites things or talks about the Bible or the Scriptures, and his Scriptures were only the Old Testament, he can sometimes cite from a Old Testament text that's closest to the Greek Old Testament translation called the Septuagint, or from one which we may not have, which is closest to our later Masoretic text, which only came about in the 10th century AD, or sometimes from this paraphrase, just like you would cite from New American Standard or the King James Bible, or maybe Good News for Modern Man, whatever, you know, something that gave the sense of what you were trying to get across, whichever did the best job. And the Targums, and these are simply, again, paraphrases, takes the Bible but it expands it with more information. It's very important. Like we come to Isaiah 53, where he talks about, it says, my servant, you know, and will do this or that, suffer and die. It says, my servant, King Messiah, puts it right in there. Okay, so this is, you know, long before Jesus appears on the scene, long before there's a dispute on these things, it's telling you that they believe this is of the Messiah. Well, here it says they interpreted the plural mountains of Ararat as two separate mountains. But two mountains would not seem to distinguish in this manner unless they stood apart from other mountains. So greater and lesser Ararat stand alone on the Ararat plain. And here's what Targum Jonathan ben Uziel, that's the term for it, says on this. He says, and the ark rested in the 7th month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Kadron. The name of the one mountain is Cardania, and the name of the other mountain, Armenia. And there was built the city of Armenia in the land of the east. So it's already located where the Armenians are. And they're on one side of the mountain today. Turkey resides on the other side of the mountain politically today. But they say there was a mountain, had a name, but it has two parts. And they named them. And that only can fit the present-day Mount Ararat. Josephus comes to our attention again. He cites some of the ancient sources, and here he says, there is a great mountain in Armenia over Minyas called Baras, upon which is reported that many who fled at the time of the deluge, that is the flood, were saved, and that one who was carried in an ark came on shore upon the top of it, and that the remains of the timber were a great while preserved. So again, this is a record from 2,000 years ago, speaking about at least 1,000 years or more before that, saying this was there in that time. Well, we have evidence also from the oldest Armenian monastery, and I won't try to butcher this by pronouncing it, but it is the oldest monastery really in the world. Okay, going back at the time of the establishment of Christianity. This is what the monastery looks like today. So the Armenians define themselves as being those who belong to Mount Ararat, Noah's heritage. I mean, this is a very important national symbol for them. Inside this monastery, there's a tapestry. What's interesting, the tapestry, we don't know how old the tapestry is for sure, but behind all these biblical figures, so it's kind of telling the story of the Bible with Jesus at the front, but in the background, if you look behind there, you'll see a mountain, and you'll see this unusual looking device pointing down on the mountain. We know that it's very accurately depicted. This is the Parrot Glacier, it's right there in the picture. What we know is that this is not just a device, but it's a symbol. Okay, it's the symbol, the Armenian letter E. And like in the Bible, it talks, God refers to himself as I am that I am. And so it's Ehya Asher Ehya in Hebrew. Here, is the Armenian is very similar, and it's simply the word I am, and refers to the name of the Lord. And it's simply saying, in some way, God's presence dwells on this mountain, at least from the way they thought of it, because actually God brought his people here, the salvation through the ark, and all of humankind emanates from this. But if we look at this, you can see the present-day mountain and features on it. You see Little Ararat on one side, you see Greater Ararat, where we're looking at this from the southern perspective. If you look at it, one of the main features is the Hora Gorge, which is only visible from around 1840. I think that's right. Somewhere in that area was an earthquake that expanded this and made it visible and destroyed the village of Ahura that was down below, and a monastery that used to be where the gorge is now. We can place things here. Here's a Google Earth picture. So if we're pinpointing this according to what it says, you can actually find almost a specific location where they believe the ark landed. All right, so this is a place. Now, as you know, despite other people talking about other places, no one in the past ever saw remains of an ark in those places. But when you come to Mount Ararat, you have eyewitness accounts going back at least 150 years. So someone saw something, and these people are not related. As you look at this, you see Armenians, you see Turks, you see people from Germans, you see Russians, you see people in the United States Air Corps that were flying over for different reasons, just all kinds. And they report the location almost being exactly the same. But because they don't know the mountain, they're not familiar with the geography, the terrain, when they try to describe where they went, they can only give you certain features. And those features can be put together. Here is a little map on one side kind of talking about certain eyewitnesses and where they saw things, and coordinated it with the actual Google map, and then coordinated with what we just looked at. So these things tend to be in the same place. Now, you say, why don't you go get it then if you know where it is? Well, we've tried. Okay, some of us, we've had those searches. I'm the one with the red holding the sign. We have our son-in-law, Eric, who passed right here in the orange on the far side. Right behind him is our son, John, so I'd make this a family affair. But the leader of the expedition is right here. And if you turn around, he's sitting in church back here as well, Dick Bright. Dick organized all this, so he's kind of waving his hand. We did this and started way back in 2008, went through 2013, and we did everything we could, but we weren't at this specific place. We were on top of the mountain. We did find an eyewitness, a Kurdish shepherd, who said he had seen it when he was a child, and this is like 40 years later, and it was difficult for him to find the place. We went with him to the place, we dug in the place, but I don't believe he was right. It's further up the mountain on the side, and there's a place we could not go because of the Kurdish PKK, which is their military, which would have not allowed us to do that, all right? But this is the part of research. You keep narrowing down. And so what I've added to this is these ancient sources, which, in my mind, confirm this is the right mountain. And then other more modern sources that say, at least from tradition, where they believe it existed. Well, so much for Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark. That's just one insight I'm bringing to you. Let's move to the Tower of Babel. That's another interesting place. And the Tower of Babel, after the flood, mankind had multiplied. It doesn't take long to multiply, by the way, but you have plenty of time. Noah was, 800-something years when he died? I can't remember how old he was exactly, 850 or something like that. And he was only 500 when we went on the ark, so he had a good longevity after that, as did others at this time, until your exponential decay curve or biological decay curve comes in and people start getting and not living quite as long. And God had said, that's what was going to be the case. 120 years would be the maximum lifespan for people. Some push it, but not really. I remember, in Judaism, they'll always say, may you live to be 120. Okay, that's the idea. And I saw kind of a card one time that asked the rabbi, how do you live to be 120? And he said, well, you live to be 119 and then be very careful. So, all right, that'll get you there, maybe. All right, so this is the site of Babylon today. Not much to see, and the Bible told us there wouldn't be much to see. This was part of prophetic fulfillment of the destruction of Babylon. But there are some scant remains like this. In the background, you see rebuilding that was done. That's what Saddam Hussein and others were trying to build this up. And so this is kind of a replica of what part of the walls looked like. But where really was the Tower of Babel when we talk about this? Babylon gets its name from that, but where was it? Well, they found recently in a private collection a man named Martin Skoyen. He's a Norwegian. He's one of the largest private collectors. Has this stuff hidden in a mountain. I mean, it's like you take a train there and there's a vault door. It's just like out of the movies. But he started to publish things, and this is one that was published recently, and it is a stele. It's made out of stone, but at the top part here, and I've enhanced it for you, there is what's called a ziggurat, which is the ancient term for these kind of mountain temples. And at the top, then a temple itself with kind of a flat diagram. And then a figure standing beside it, and we know who the figure is that identifies it. It's Nebuchadnezzar II. Now, this is from the 7th century BC. But here, what he's saying is he built this intimate, clunky ziggurat, but he said this was originally the ziggurat from the Tower of Babel, which is the original one, and he is restoring it. So he's talking about restoring the Tower of Babel. So this is the way it's depicted. And it fits the concept of these. Everywhere we go, everywhere we know about ziggurats, this is the form of it. We don't have this ziggurat any longer. We have Nebuchadnezzar's clay seal here. We have a tablet called the Esagila tablet, and this is from 229 BC. But interesting enough, it records dimensions of the Tower of Babel, or of this particular tower and temple or ziggurat that Nebuchadnezzar II built. So it tells us what this is like. It would be something like this as the artist reconstruct it. And so at the very top you have a temple which would reach to heaven or be kind of a conduit between the gods and earth. And in a sense, this is what they were trying to do. They were building a building. They wanted to keep all of humanity together in one place. The idea of we're better together, all right, had one language. They were able to accomplish things. But they had thought they could somehow reach God. This is the whole problem with religion today. With religion, we say we can find a way to God. We can make God, notice us. We can somehow placate him. We can somehow get his favor by things we do. We're moving his direction. Well, that's not the gospel. That's not the Bible. The Bible says we're poor, lost sinners. We are desperate. We cannot do anything on our own. Unless God comes down to us and is gracious to us, we have no hope. And that's exactly the opposite of what was happening at Babel. And God took care of that, okay, by scattering them and confusing the language. Here is a ziggurat that exists still in Iraq, and it's very similar probably to what the Tower of Babel would have looked like. But now at least we know there was a Tower of Babel historically, because the Babylonian sources tell us there was. And where it would have been located? Probably right there in Babylon. Some people say Eridu, which is an earlier, but Eridu is part of Babylon proper. So going back to the earliest recorded history, this would have been there. Let me jump for a moment to Moses and our 10 Commandments. Moses wrote because the Bible says he wrote. It says he wrote them, and Jesus said Moses wrote things, and he wrote about me, he said. So that's what was in the Torah, the things related to our Lord Jesus. But the language has always eluded people. How do we know he wrote? And so this depiction shows him writing what's called proto-consonantal script, which probably goes back to the time of Joseph, the time before Moses. It was a script that took the Hebrew language and put it in a form, and as a result, they were able to actually write scripture. Moses was trained in all the wisdom of Egypt, according to the book of Acts, but you couldn't write the Bible in Egyptian hieroglyphics. You'd be rolling something out, longer than this church 10 times over. You needed something more concise. So, in a place called Sarabat Akadim, it's down in the Sinai desert, where the Israelites went as they came through, where others who had mining operations were. These are caves. These are caves where people could get out of the hot sun and just take a break, particularly a lot of the people doing turquoise mining and things down here. And so on the walls, there is graffiti. You're sitting there, something to do, just write something on the walls, and that's what happened. So these have been enhanced bits. It's hard to see it, but this is showing you some of the lettering there. Here is some of it, the way it would actually look. And I'm outside the cave in my younger days, pointing to the fact that you even have a Jewish menorah on the outside, so you know that Jews were there. Among these, we have some very interesting inscriptions. Now, I know there's one that's come out in the news lately that Moses said he was here, and I've talked to different epigraphists, and they don't trust it. This is a rabbi who means well, but he's not qualified to make that judgment. And others who've looked at this says he's reading it backwards. But this fella is qualified, it's Doug Petrovich, and Doug published this. So in his, he also found in these inscriptions something that Moses has written, and it says, or someone written about Moses, our bond servitude had lingered, it says. Moses then provoked astonishment. It's the year of astonishment because of the lady. And the lady in this case is probably Hathor, who they made the golden calf after. This were the leading figures in Egypt. So it mentions Moses' name. It mentions the confusion and things that happened because the term is actually Baalath, but that's a term for this figure like Baal, but this is the feminine form of it. So this is what we'd have there. So we have these kind of things there. We're very interesting. What about the Hebrews themselves being in Egypt? Well, let me just talk about that for a moment in the Egyptian record. For one thing, we have a document called the Brooklyn Papyrus. You may have never heard of it, but this is what it looks like. It's, of course, fragmentary. But one of the things about it is that there's 40 names on this document, and they're all Semitic. 10 are specifically Hebrew, and it even uses the term we have as the term for Hebrew. So it refers to people who are Hebrews. Genesis 39:17 uses that same kind of phrase for those who resided in Egypt during the time of Joseph and his family. So it confirms the presence of Hebrews in Egypt at the time of Joseph. It's very important. And if you look at some of these Hebrew names, some of them are actually in the Bible too. So excavations have been taking place for the last 30-something years at a place called Avaris. That's the ancient name. The modern term is Tel Adaba. This is what it would look like perhaps in the time of Joseph. And this is excavations under Manfred Bitek. He's an Australian who's been excavated here. He's not a believer, not a Bible believer, but a lot of the stuff he has found, it fits with the Bible. Some of these houses that he finds are called 4-room houses. Well, so what? Well, because that's the Israelite type house. You only find them in the land of Canaan during the Israelite period. And now here they are in Egypt, down here in what the area we call Goshen. So in this delta area, this is where the Hebrews should have been found, and in fact, that's where they are. This is their houses. But some of the other things they found, he found this building. This is a reconstruction of it, but it's a pyramid type of tomb or memorial. We don't know, exactly. But what was found in it was a figure like this. Now, this is again a reconstruction, just showing you two ideas of it. But what they found were these pieces. Okay, you see one small piece up at the top, reconstructed from, and part of the head. They found this. So someone with this kind of headdress, someone with a striped outfit holding a symbol of a rule. And this has been identified either as Joseph or Jacob. A lot of people are saying really it's Jacob, and Joseph built this memorial to his father there in that land where the Hebrews were dwelling. And so this sets him apart, an Asiatic man who is given this kind of rule. All right? But when we come to Egypt itself, we identified people called the Sashu, and these are them. These are the Hebrews captives in Egypt. They found a temple of Amenhotep III, and what's even more interesting on here, they show the Sashu and they mention the Sashu of Yahweh, the term used in the Bible for the God of Israel. More than that, a German scholar has found in an Egyptian book called the Book of the Heavenly Cow a phrase in Egyptian that reads, "I am that I am." There's nothing like this in Egyptian. So he says this is taken directly from the idea of a God who's the God who is, I am that I am. Very interesting stuff that's coming out. Here is the Pharaoh of the oppression, Tutmosis III, and the Pharaoh of the Exodus, Amenhotep II, from the dating I give to it. And these guys saw Moses face to face. So very interesting. We have them. If you go to Egypt today, you can go to the Museum of Civilization, and all the mummies are there for you to see. Well, thank you for giving me that time. I have more, always have more, but the idea is that insights from archaeology continue to come as God gives the opportunity, and that impacts the Bible, saying it is real. The things that happen really happen. And the people who took the trouble to write accurate history also wrote accurate theology, so we can believe their message, and it helps us affirm our trust and faith in God's Word.